James Harrison, a retired and wealthy man in his late 70s, sat in his sleek black Mercedes on a quiet stretch of road in rural Tennessee. The summer heat pressed down as the car's air conditioner struggled to keep him cool. He stared at his phone, frustrated by the lack of signal and the flat tire that had left him stranded far from his luxurious estate outside Nashville. Used to solving problems with a quick phone call, James now found himself waiting, powerless. Just as irritation began to bubble, he noticed a figure approaching, a boy no older than 14, dressed in a faded t-shirt and scuffed sneakers. The boy's determined stride and confident expression caught James off guard. "Got a flat, sir?" the boy asked, his voice steady. James nodded. "Yes. Any chance you can help?" With a polite smile, the boy replied, "Sure can. My grandpa taught me last summer." He knelt beside the car, transforming James's frustration into quiet amazement. James watched in quiet astonishment as the boy worked on the flat tire with a precision and focus that belied his years. The sweltering Tennessee sun beat down on them, but the boy didn't seem to mind. James, who had spent decades in air-conditioned boardrooms making multi-million-dollar decisions, felt out of his depth watching this young stranger solve a problem that had rendered him helpless. The boy's name, as James learned during their brief conversation, was Tyler, and he lived just a few miles down the road. He spoke with an easy confidence, describing how his grandfather had taught him to fix cars and handle tools. James, unused to such casual but earnest exchanges, found himself captivated by the boy's humility and straightforwardness. As Tyler tightened the final lug nut, he wiped his hands on his worn jeans and stood, brushing dust from his knees. "All done, sir," he said with a small, satisfied smile. James reached into his wallet, pulling out a crisp $100 bill. "Here, Tyler," he said, holding it out. "I can't tell you how much I appreciate your help." Tyler took a step back, shaking his head politely. "Thank you, but I can't take that," he said firmly. "I just wanted to help." James was stunned. In all his years, he couldn't remember a time when someone had refused money from him. He stood there, the bill still in his hand, as Tyler gave him a polite nod, turned, and walked back down the road toward his home. Sitting back in his car, James couldn't shake the feeling that something profound had just happened. He replayed the interaction in his mind during the rest of his drive home, Tyler's confident refusal lingering in his thoughts. The boy had carried himself with a kind of integrity and self-assurance James rarely encountered, even among the most successful people he knew. That evening, James sat alone in his grand home. The perfectly prepared steak and roasted vegetables on his plate went untouched as he stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking his sprawling property. For the first time in years, he felt the silence of his house weigh on him. It wasn't just quiet, it was empty. He thought about Tyler's scuffed sneakers, his steady hands, and the genuine smile on his face as he turned down the money. The boy didn't have much, but he carried himself with a dignity James couldn't stop admiring. It was something money couldn't buy, something James, for all his wealth and success, realized he might be lacking. James reflected on his own life. He had spent decades climbing the corporate ladder, accumulating wealth and influence. But when had he last done something truly selfless? When had he helped someone without expecting anything in return? The answers unsettled him. As the grandfather clock chimed in the corner, James felt a strange mix of nostalgia and regret. Memories of his own modest upbringing surfaced, of his father's calloused hands and his mother's quiet determination to make ends meet. Somewhere along the way, he had lost touch with those values. Looking out into the darkness, James made a decision. He couldn't let this moment pass without acknowledging what Tyler had given him, a lesson in humility and the power of simple kindness. For the first time in years, James felt compelled to act, not out of obligation or expectation, but because it was the right thing to do. Tyler had reminded him of something he hadn't realized he'd been missing, and James knew he couldn't ignore it. James couldn't shake the sense of unfinished business after his visit to Tyler's home. The boy had given him something intangible, a glimpse of what truly mattered in life. As he drove away that day, James resolved to do more than just express his gratitude. He wanted to make a difference, not just for Tyler and his family, but for himself as well. The following morning, James sat in his home office, surrounded by the trappings of his success, awards, plaques, and framed photos of corporate triumphs. But none of it felt meaningful. He picked up the phone and began making calls, first to old colleagues in construction and home improvement, then to suppliers he had worked with over the years. Within hours, James had assembled a team willing to help him execute his plan. A week later, trucks began arriving at Tyler's home. James stood on the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, directing workers as they unloaded supplies. Tyler's mother, Susan, stepped onto the porch, her expression a mixture of shock and confusion. "Mr. Harrison," she called out, her voice trembling. "What's all this?" James approached her with a warm smile. "Susan, your family has given me more than you realize. You reminded me of what life is supposed to be about: kindness, connection, and purpose. This is my way of saying thank you." Tears welled in her eyes as she glanced at the workers measuring and unloading materials. "You didn't have to do this. We've managed just fine," she said, her voice breaking. James shook his head gently. "You've done more than manage, Susan. You've thrived, and you've raised an incredible young man. This isn't charity. It's my chance to honor the strength and values your family represents." Tyler, who had been watching from the yard, approached cautiously. "What's going on, mister?" he asked, his curiosity evident. James knelt slightly, meeting the boy's gaze. "We're fixing up your home, Tyler. A new roof, a sturdy porch, and maybe even a surprise or two in the backyard." The boy's eyes widened. "You don't have to do that," he said earnestly. "We're okay." "I know," James replied with a smile, "but sometimes it's okay to let people help you, just like you helped me." Over the next several weeks, the transformation began. The sagging porch was replaced with fresh, sturdy wood. The roof was repaired, and the interior of the house was given new paint and polished floors. In the backyard, a brand new swing set took the place of the rusted, broken one. Tyler tried to help wherever he could, carrying planks and sweeping debris. James often had to insist that he take a break, but the boy's energy and curiosity couldn't be contained. One of the construction workers, a burly man named Joe, noticed Tyler's interest and began teaching him how to measure wood and use basic tools. Tyler soaked up the knowledge like a sponge, his enthusiasm infectious. James watched from a distance, a warm pride swelling in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt like he was part of something meaningful, something beyond himself. Seeing Tyler's excitement and the gratitude in Susan's eyes filled a void he hadn't realized was there. When the renovations were finally complete, the house stood as a testament to resilience and hope. As neighbors gathered to admire the changes, Susan turned to James, her voice thick with emotion. "This isn't just a house anymore. It's a home. I don't know how we can ever thank you." James shook his head, his tone soft. "You already have. Your family reminded me of what truly matters. I think I'm the one who should be thanking you." Looking at Tyler, James added, "Never lose that kindness, Tyler. It's rare and it's powerful. You've inspired me more than you'll ever know." The day the renovations were completed, the Andrews home buzzed with life. Neighbors gathered to admire the transformation, sharing smiles and warm congratulations. Susan Andrews stood on the newly rebuilt porch, her eyes welling with tears as she looked at her home. It wasn't just the fresh paint or the sturdy roof. It was the sense of renewal and hope that filled every corner of the house. Tyler's wide grin lit up the yard as he showed off the new swing set to his friends, his laughter ringing out under the Tennessee sun. James Harrison stood off to the side, leaning against the railing he had insisted on reinforcing himself. For the first time in years, he felt something more than just satisfaction. He felt pride, not in wealth or accomplishments, but in being part of something meaningful. He sipped the iced tea Susan had handed him earlier, watching as life unfolded around the home he had helped rebuild. Susan approached him, her hands clasped in front of her. "I don't know how we can ever thank you," she said softly, her voice still thick with emotion. James smiled, shaking his head. "You don't have to, Susan. This wasn't about money or favors. Your family reminded me of something I'd lost sight of, what it means to truly connect with people." She nodded, her eyes scanning the bustling scene before them. "It's more than just the house. You've given us something we didn't even know we were missing, a sense of possibility." James felt the weight of her words, understanding them more deeply than he could express. He turned his gaze to Tyler, who was now talking animatedly with one of the construction workers, Joe, who had taken the boy under his wing during the project. Tyler's enthusiasm for learning about tools and construction had grown over the weeks, and James could see a spark of ambition in him that reminded him of his own younger self. When Tyler spotted James, he bounded over, his energy as infectious as ever. "Mr. Harrison," he began, slightly out of breath. "Joe said I've got a good eye for measuring and building. He said if I keep practicing, I could be really good at it someday." James knelt slightly, meeting the boy's excited gaze. "He's absolutely right, Tyler. You've got talent, and more importantly, you've got heart. That's what makes you stand out." Tyler grinned, his face lighting up. "I want to do this one day. Help people the way you helped us." James felt a lump rise in his throat. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You've already started, Tyler. Your kindness set all of this in motion. Don't ever lose that." As the evening wore on, the neighbors began to leave, and the Andrews family settled into their new home. Susan invited James to stay for dinner, a simple but heartfelt meal that reminded him of his own childhood. They talked and laughed, sharing stories as if they had known each other for years. Later that night, as James drove back to his estate, he realized he wasn't just leaving a finished project behind. He was leaving a piece of himself, a part of his soul he hadn't tapped into in decades. Tyler and his family had reignited something in him, a sense of purpose beyond the trappings of wealth. In the weeks that followed, James found himself drawn back to the Andrews home time and time again. He helped Tyler continue learning about construction, arranging for him to shadow contractors and learn valuable skills. The boy's curiosity and determination reminded James of his own beginnings, and for the first time in years, he felt truly connected to the world around him. Tyler's home wasn't just transformed. It had become a symbol of resilience, kindness, and the power of community. And for James, it marked the start of a new chapter, one defined not by financial success, but by the joy of giving and the beauty of human connection. As the weeks passed, James found himself becoming a regular presence in Tyler's life. No longer just a benefactor, he felt more like a mentor, and perhaps even a friend. He marveled at how much joy and meaning these visits brought him. Each trip to the Andrews home was filled with purpose, helping Tyler sharpen his skills, sharing stories, and simply being present in a way he hadn't been for anyone in years. Tyler's newfound interest in construction blossomed into a full-blown passion. James arranged for him to spend afternoons shadowing Joe, the construction worker who had taken a liking to the boy during the renovation. Tyler was a quick learner, eagerly asking questions about tools, techniques, and blueprints. James watched with pride as Tyler's confidence grew, each project a step closer to his dream of one day becoming an engineer. One Saturday, James arrived with a surprise. He had brought Tyler a brand new toolkit, complete with everything a budding builder could need. As Tyler unwrapped the set, his eyes widened with excitement. "Are you serious, Mr. Harrison?" he asked, holding up a shiny new hammer. James chuckled. "Completely serious. Every builder needs the right tools." Tyler grinned from ear to ear. "Thank you. I promise I'll use these to do something great." James placed a hand on his shoulder. "I don't doubt that for a second." Meanwhile, James was undergoing his own transformation. His once rigid daily routine now revolved around the connections he was building. His visits to the Andrews home, the warmth of their family dinners, and the laughter that filled their modest house gave him a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. He started rethinking what success truly meant, realizing it had little to do with wealth and everything to do with the relationships he fostered. One evening, after a long day of helping Tyler with a small woodworking project, James sat on the Andrews rebuilt porch with Susan. The stars twinkled above as they shared a quiet moment, sipping coffee and reflecting on how much had changed. "You've done more for us than I can put into words," Susan said, her voice soft but sincere. "This home, the opportunities you've given Tyler, it's more than we ever could have hoped for." James shook his head, his expression thoughtful. "Susan, your family gave me something far greater. You reminded me of what life is really about, showing up for the people who matter." As they sat in comfortable silence, Tyler burst out of the house, holding a small wooden birdhouse he had just finished painting. "What do you think?" he asked, holding it up proudly. James smiled. "It's perfect, Tyler. You've got a real talent." "Can we hang it on the porch?" Tyler asked, already looking for the perfect spot. "Absolutely," James replied, rising to help him. As they hammered the birdhouse into place, James felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known he was missing. In the weeks that followed, the impact of their connection rippled outward. Tyler's confidence continued to grow, inspiring his classmates and friends in their small Tennessee town. James, in turn, found himself reconnecting with old friends and even volunteering in the community, channeling his resources and energy into causes that aligned with his newfound values. The Andrews family's home had become more than just a house. It was a symbol of resilience, kindness, and possibility. And for James, it was a reminder that life's greatest rewards weren't found in boardrooms or bank accounts, but in the moments of genuine connection and selfless giving that brought people together. One afternoon, as James was wrapping up another visit to the Andrews home, Tyler approached him with a thoughtful expression. "Mr. Harrison," he began, his voice steady, "I've been thinking. What you've done for us. It's made me want to do something like this for other people someday." James felt a swell of pride as he looked at the boy. "Tyler, you already have. Your kindness set all of this in motion. Never underestimate the power of a small act of generosity." Tyler nodded, his face lighting up with determination. "I want to make a difference like you." "You will," James said firmly. "Just keep that heart of yours. It'll take you far." As James drove away, he realized that Tyler had not only inspired him, but was now carrying the torch of kindness forward. The boy wasn't just a student anymore. He was a teacher in his own right. In 2025, James and Tyler's story reminds us of the timeless power of kindness and human connection in a fast-paced, technology-driven world. It teaches us that true wealth lies not in material possessions, but in the relationships we nurture and the positive impact we have on others. By stepping out of our comfort zones and showing up for those in need, we can create ripples of change that inspire others to do the same. As society increasingly values convenience over connection, this story urges us to slow down, prioritize empathy, and remember the profound strength of selfless giving. Let's take inspiration from James and Tyler's story and turn their lesson into action. How can we, like James, invest in the next generation? Support local youth programs, mentor someone in your community, or simply reach out with kindness. What advice would you give James as he continues his journey of giving back? Should he start a foundation to support young dreamers like Tyler, or focus on building connections within his community? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's celebrate the power of small actions that spark big changes. Together, we can continue their legacy of kindness and purpose.